from New York to our Bloomberg television and radio audiences worldwide. Welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston. We're going to start once again today with the markets because we had abysmal jobs numbers out, losing something like 20.5 million jobs last month. But nevertheless, the equity markets are up. And Abigail Doolittle is going to explain to us exactly why they're not selling on the news. Abigail.
It's just incredible, those jobs numbers, really devastating from a human standpoint and also an economic standpoint. So you would think it would take a toll on the markets. But at this point, we've been talking about this disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street. So it's continuing. You can see the S&P 500 charging higher, up 1.4% right now, up about 3% on the week. And this has a lot, David, to do with Fed liquidity. Everybody's talking about that backstop, the Fed really getting in there and making sure that the financial system is liquid and moving well. And so we see markets, risk assets, responding very well to that response, as has been the case, quite frankly, over the last roughly 12 years or so. Relative to today, though, again, stocks sharply higher. Another positive impetus for stocks. We have crude oil, another risk asset, recovering once again at $24 a barrel, up 2.5%. So some folks out there thinking that the demand picture is improving. That is sending the energy sector to the top of the list. And that is also helping small cap, which is up nearly 3%, some outperformance. A lot of those energy companies at this point are on the smaller cap side. As for bonds, though, and the Fed, of course, this week has been about the news of more issuance from Treasury at the long end of the curve. We do have the yield curve once again today steepening. In fact, steepening, I think, 4 out of the last 5 days, rising, steepening by about 11 bips this week. Now, that is healthy. That's the yield curve normalizing, something that the Fed and others want to see. However, if it continues to steepen, earlier this week, it seemed as though it was putting some volatility in the markets to the downside, or actually to the sideways chop way. That's not happening today. But keep an eye on that yield curve, especially today. We have the long end selling off, but that 2-year carving out another record low, David.
Pretty extraordinary. Thank you so much to Abigail Doolittle. Well, as we say, 20.5 million jobs were eliminated in the United States last month. But really, that's only the beginning of the story. There's a lot more to these numbers. And for that, we bring in now Diane Swank. She's the chief economist for Grant Thornton. Welcome, Diane. Good to have you with us. What are the things below that top line number that you're looking at?
I'm sorry, I'm getting some other conversation. Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, so was I. We were hearing the same person. So let me try it once again. 20.5, a lot more to the numbers. What are the numbers below the 20.5, the other more specific numbers that you're looking at?
You know, what really is, first of all, the 20.5, the Bureau of Labor Statistics made an attempt to really capture the losses related to COVID-19 by re-estimating their birth and death rates of new firm formation plummeted in March. The problem is it probably came to a virtual standstill in April, so these numbers are still understating the actual estimates of what was actually lost in the month of April, because you couldn't capture all of those small business losses that were really out there. That's important. The other issue is the 14.7% on the unemployment rate. That once again, many workers said they were absent from work who were likely unemployed. When you add those back into the equation, that adds another, brings us back up to 20%, and the labor force participation rate at its lowest level since 1973. Simply stunning, as everything from parents having to stay home with children and pull themselves out of the labor market because they don't have daycare, to the fact that you're not looking for a job in an economy that's literally shuttered. Our economic statistics were meant for a more traditional recession, and we also allowed people to get unemployment insurance when they weren't looking for a job, because we did close down the economy, but that means less people were counted as the unemployed. We also saw this huge surge in those people having to, once again, almost fivefold the last month, which was a record number. Other people had to accept part-time instead of full-time work. This really was, to a large extent, not people just getting their hours cut back, but full-time workers actually being scaled back to part-time workers. I know many workers and many companies that put their employees on 4/5 time to cut their wages by 20% to be able to preserve the number of jobs they still had in a very low cash flow environment, a cash tight environment. And I think that's important to understand as well. There was that big headline number of, all the workers that thought this was temporary because they were told they were put on furlough and that they would be recalled back to their jobs. Some 78.3% of those workers thinking that they'll be called back. My concern is that in a world where we continue to socially distance, it's going to be very hard, especially for the hardest hit industries, to ramp up to anything close to what the previous 100% capacity was. So many of those who are on temporary unemployment may find it to be much more permanent as we get into the summer.
And Diane, talk a bit about the sectors. People going into this were thinking, maybe even hoping that leisure and restaurants and things would be the bulk of it. They did get hit very hard, but it wasn't limited to that sector. For example, healthcare is a surprise. You'd think, given a pandemic, that would be up. In fact, they lost over 2 million jobs.
Yeah, it was really stunning, the losses in healthcare. There was nowhere to hide. Even professional services had massive layoffs. We saw almost 1 million losses at the government level, 2/3 of which were basically education losses, the collateral damage from schools closing. But, those losses in healthcare are really interesting because it's sort of counterintuitive in a health crisis that we would have healthcare workers laid off. But remember, many doctors' offices, people started to pull back. We saw the largest healthcare losses in history in March before we shut down one state or one school, and that was because people stopped going to doctors' offices for fear that they would actually get contagion. Dental offices were also shuttered, and then elective surgeries were taken off the equation to help the hospitals deal with the influx of COVID patients, a huge blow to profitability for hospitals at a time when their costs are escalating due to COVID-19. So you really did see the collateral damage, and this is an area where it's also still really risky to reopen. As they reopen, you're still going to have to continue to socially distance. My own dentist, despite some easier constraints on dentists in Illinois after May 1st, he is not reopening. He's still paying his staff, but he's not reopening because he can't ensure the safety of his staff and clients and keep the social distancing necessary when he's literally working in people's mouths. And I think that's really important to understand as well, that even in the healthcare industry, some of these job losses could be more lingering than many expect.
Diane, I don't want to let you go without talking about the fact that sadly, as too often happens, the people who can least afford it get hurt the worst. As you look at these numbers, you saw the average hourly wage go up a lot, but that's because the people losing their jobs didn't get paid as much, and also minorities got hit hard and women.
Exactly. We really saw this disproportionate hit among Hispanics, blacks. The reduction in losses in participation among minorities was particularly large. Also, the unemployment rate for those less than a high school degree surged over 20%, and that was with reductions in participation in the labor force. So it's actually much higher than that. When you start making these adjustments, we're well into Depression-era levels. And when you lose, the participation rate among women fell more rapidly than the participation rate among men, again reflecting some of that difference in the number of jobs held by women in the sector, but also that took over more of the parenting responsibilities as children were sent home from school and can't rejoin the labor force. That's going to be a hard nut to crack going forward, because those workers who can least afford child care are going to be left out the longest and unable to come back to work. That's a major hurdle for employers out there as well. And remember, women's participation coming back was one of the reasons we saw the participation rate improved so much. That was driving the gains since 2015.
Okay, Diane, really appreciate you being with us today on this historic day, really, in jobless numbers. That's Diane Swank. She is the chief economist at Grant Thornton. And in the second hour of Balance of Power, we're going to get to talk with Eugene Scalia. He's the Labor Department secretary about these numbers. Meanwhile, in this hour of Balance of Power, we're going to be talking with the CEO of Carrier, nearly spun off from United Technologies, having a tough first quarter, I think it's fair to say. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Weston. Well, as we've said, those job numbers were bleak today. Over 20 million jobs were lost last month. And we talked with the National Economic Council Director, he is Larry Kudlow, earlier today about those numbers and also his hopes for the future.
This is a tough time, but it's a tough time for everybody in America. There's no question about that. Wherever you work or don't work, it's a tough time. This jobs report today is full of heartbreak, is full of hardship. I believe that it will prove to be temporary, because I think the pandemic contraction, or the contraction in the economy caused by the pandemic, COVID-19, will prove to be temporary, and that we are actually coming down the home stretch in terms of reopening the economy. But it's a rough number. There's no question about that. Some of this looks to be temporary layoffs, maybe about 3/4 of it, but that still doesn't necessarily make it any better. People expect to return to jobs. Let's hope that they can return to jobs. Look, we have done President Trump's leadership, Vice President Pence, we put together enormous rescue package, cash, liquidity, Federal Reserve, payroll protection. It's a remarkable thing. I was actually adding it up. It's about $9 trillion now, including the Federal Reserve and what we've done on fiscal policy in the budget. Some of this may have worked. We may have cushioned the decline. That may be part of the story inside these very, very difficult numbers. So we will see how this works, and we will see whether we have to go back. Let's talk about presidential policies in a few moments, because I do believe the second half of this year, according to the CBO and private forecasters, the second half is going to have very significant bounce back in economic growth, and that will head into 2021, which could be a fantastic economic recovery year.
When it comes to reopening, I want to understand, and I know you're an optimistic man, whether you've done any contingency planning for a second wave and another shutdown. Are you doing that contingency planning now?
Yes, we are, as a matter of fact. It's a subject that comes up. I'm not going to go into detail. It's outside my lane. You have to talk to Ambassador Birx on that, Dr. Fauci and Vice President Trump's terrific team that he's assembled. I will tell you this without naming names, but one of the senior people on that group, I asked that person, what happens, right now the virus numbers are flattening out. That is a really good thing. That means we can reopen this economy. So I asked this person, what happens if you get a jump back up in the virus numbers? And the response was simply, look, we won't have to re-shut down because, first of all, we know more, we have more experience, and second of all, we are much better equipped with the right tools.
Are you rethinking again your relationship with the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, I don't think we ever stopped thinking about it, but all I'll say is this. First of all, as you know from reports today, Ambassador Lighthizer, Secretary Mnuchin met with Vice Premier Liu He of China. It was a very constructive meeting. The printout, the communique, if you will, was very positive. China continues to tell us that they have every intention of meeting the requirements and the implementations of the deal that was signed formally last winter. Seems like 1,000 years ago, but it was actually only a couple of months ago. They're a little bit behind on commodity purchases. That may be a function, of course, of market and economic conditions. But Liu He said they are pledged to continue, including, I might add, remedies for intellectual property theft and related measures. So those talks seem to go well and were constructive. However, the Chinese relationship is very complex. And we know that the virus originated in China. We are investigating, we, the U.S. government, the intelligence agencies, National Security Council, State Department, etc., are carefully investigating what happened and what didn't happen, what may have happened and what actually happened. China has been not transparent. A lot of people are concerned. I saw this with the president at the G7 video teleconference meeting a couple of weeks ago, and the other world leaders felt the same way. They will be held accountable, Jonathan. They will be held accountable when the final studies are in.
That was Larry Kudlow speaking from the White House with our colleague John Farrow. Coming up here, we're going to talk with the CEO of Carrier. He's David Gitlin, about his first quarter earnings and what lies ahead for his company. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Well, earlier today, the CEO of Siemens, that huge German industrial engineering company, spoke with our Anna Edwards and specifically talked about the future and the fact that they were withdrawing their 2020 guidance.
I'm happy to see that the market is responding well to what we have been saying. Now, obviously, Siemens has been very early in restructuring the company to a very resilient portfolio, be it healthcare, be it the industrial automation, and also the actions we have been taking on the energy side. We are right on plan with our spin-off of the Siemens Energy business. So we will have, by that time, we will have a very, very well-focused company portfolio. So I think that's what we are looking at. And of course, times are turbulent and they are complicated and they are very hard to deal with because there's so much uncertainty from other partners and areas. But the fact of the matter is there will be a time after Corona. And that's also the time we look at to get prepared for the upswing and how we can benefit from that in a proper way. And I always say to my people, the night is darkest before dawn. So think about the future too, without neglecting what needs to be done now at a very, very severe global crisis.
Yeah, some comforting words, I'm sure. In terms of the balance sheet and how you prepare the balance sheet for this crisis, then, Joe, you've recently secured another 3 billion euros in credit lines. Do you have concerns around liquidity?
No, we don't. We really don't. I mean, cash is not endless, obviously, so we are mindful about our cash position too, but we have a very experienced, very strong CFO who holds things together very well. As you know, we have had our AGM early February in 2020, where we paid out the dividend of €3.90 per share, which was up 10 cents from a prior year. So we are done with that one. By end of September, we will bring the Siemens Energy asset to the market as a spin-off. That means this is a dividend in kind of material size. So that means that there will be shareholder value associated with that too for fiscal 2020. On the liquidity side, this is true. We did secure a 3 billion loan, but that loan actually is supposed to transfer to the Siemens Energy asset so that they are well financed and well in a good position for a successful start into their public company environment by end of September.
And Joe, you've managed to keep a lot of your factories open. You've kept your plants open.
That was Siemens CEO speaking with our very own Anna Edwards. In the meantime, Carrier spun off just about a month ago now, right in the middle of a pandemic. It's not easy to spin off in the best of circumstances, but David Gitlin, the CEO, has managed to do it. He's just had his first quarter earnings report, and he joins us now. Welcome, David. I'm really glad to have you with us. I'm sorry about some technical problems here. Give us your quick synopsis of what you learned in that first quarter.
Well, thank you, David, very much for having me, and apologies for the technical difficulties. Yeah, the first quarter was very informative for us. What we saw is the pandemic really started in China, and our experience in China was very much a V-shape. We saw orders go down in the month of February 50%. They were down 40% in China for the first quarter overall. But the good news was that the snapback was just as steep. So we were back in April at 2019 levels on orders. What happened for us is then, as it migrated west, we did see it hit us in Europe. Our orders were down 10% in the first quarter, and then it really accelerated the decline as we got into April. They were down 30% in April. And then it, of course, migrated to the United States, where we saw orders in the first quarter down 5% and down 25% in the month of April. So it's moved this way. I don't expect the recovery in the U.S. and Europe to be as steep as what we saw in China. It'll be a shallower recovery, but I am confident that we'll recover as we get into late 3Q and certainly 4Q.
Have you been able to learn anything about the thesis of your spin-off from United Technologies through this process? What is the advantage of what you're doing? What is the upside?
The advantage is that as an independent carrier, we can make our own investment priority calls. When you're part of a conglomerate, it's only natural that the parent company would decide how capital is allocated within the business, and whether it's big aerospace acquisitions or building a new engine. What we can do as an independent carrier is make the capital priority calls focused on our priorities, which is profitable growth. So Number one is focus on the growth agenda that we've laid out. Number two is we can become a more agile company, a more innovative company, a very fast company that's focused on our customers winning and growth. And we're starting to see that with our new team. And frankly, certainly going public on April 3rd was not ideal timing. But in many respects, it really brought our team closer together. It brought out the new Carrier culture of really being very agile in this current state. So we feel very strong about our investment thesis. We've laid out 3 pillars of growth funded by a very aggressive cost reduction program, and all are getting great traction.
Right, and just quickly here, David, if you could, I know that you think that maybe HVAC, which is a lot of your business, may actually grow because of this pandemic. Are you thinking about maybe any acquisitions or mergers, or is that too soon?
Right now, no. We're focused on heads down implementing our execution plan. We have said that we will take a very clinical look at the current portfolio that we have, and if there's things that we think are better with another company or things that don't fit our strategic priorities or our financial criteria, we will look at making sure that we have the right portfolio. And if we decide that we have to divest something or we should divest something, we will in the right environment. And then for the more strategic kind of transformative plays, the way we look at that is we have a lot of portfolio optionality, but not a portfolio imperative. So we'll keep our eye on those opportunities as we go forward.
And can you still make your cost cut goals in this merger, despite the fact you're going to have to add some costs to avoid the future of the pandemic?
Yes, we actually are going to take out an additional $425 million of costs beyond what we had originally thought this year. So we're being very aggressive on the 2020 cost reduction targets. And then longer term, we said that Carrier 600 is a cost takeout of $600 million over 3 years. We actually are on track to beat the number that we had put in there for 2020. So I'm very, very confident in the cost takeout program. The key for us is going to be growth. And one of the opportunities arising from the pandemic is for us to really be part of the new normal, especially when we think about things like indoor air quality and creating truly healthy buildings.
Right, we're certainly going to be thinking about our air quality going forward. Thank you so much, David. And congratulations on getting that spin-off done despite the pandemic. That's David Gitlin of Carrier. Coming up here, we're going to have Gene Sperling, who advised 2 presidents as a senior economic advisor. He has a new book out called Economic Integrity. We'll talk about that. And this is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It is time now for First Word News, and for that we go to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. Bloomberg has learned that a White House aide has tested positive for coronavirus infection. This is the second person working at the executive residence to contract the virus this week. Earlier in the week, a member of the military who works on the White House grounds tested positive for the virus. President Trump and Vice President Pence said Thursday that they are each now tested daily for the coronavirus. Democrats on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee plan to introduce legislation today to restore U.S. funding for the World Health Organization. They also want to earmark $9 billion to support international efforts to fight the pandemic. President Trump temporarily suspended U.S. payments to the WHO after accusing the agency of being complicit in the spread of the virus by accepting initial claims from China about the severity of the outbreak. Almost 1 million people in Johannesburg, South Africa are in need of food aid due to movement restrictions imposed to curb the coronavirus pandemic. That's according to the mayor of South Africa's wealthiest city. While South Africa has less than 9,000 infections, it's still one of the highest numbers on the continent. The government imposed a lockdown in late March. After fighting to get the U.S. government's case against him thrown out, former Trump aide Michael Flynn may not be completely out of the woods just yet. Flynn must get the green light from federal judge Emmett Sullivan, and that's not guaranteed. Judge Sullivan could ask for a hearing on the Justice Department's decision to seek a dismissal. Flynn had pleaded guilty to lying to FBI agents in connection with the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Thank you so much, Mark. Well, we have never seen an economic crisis like the one we're in right now. On the other hand, Gene Sperling has seen his own fair share of ups and downs in the economy as he served as director of the National Economic Council under both President Clinton and President Obama. He's taken a lot of what he's thought about and much of what he's learned and put it together in a new book out just this week called Economic Dignity. And we welcome him now back to Bloomberg. So first of all, congratulations on bringing out this magnum opus, Gene, if I can call it that. But give us a sense of economic dignity. What is it? You have three pillars. Take us briefly through those three pillars, and then we'll talk about how they apply to our situation now.
Well, thanks, David. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to write a different type of economic book, and I will say one that is designed to be completely accessible to the average person, and partly because that's what it's about. It's not about what's the GDP target or the exact economic metric. It's asking to step back another level and say, why do we do what we do? What's our ultimate aspiration for economic policy? And in defining that as economic dignity, I mentioned three things. One, do each of us have the capacity to care for our family and actually be there for them at life's most precious and meaningful, joyful and sad moments? Two, do each of us have the first and second chances to pursue our potential and our purpose as the ideal of our country has been so based? And third, and this is critical, can we contribute in the economy with respect and without domination and humiliation? And I do think, though I couldn't have known it when I wrote the book, that with the virus, we really are at a moment of truth on economic dignity. And I always quote the Martin Luther King's statement at the 1968 Memphis sanitation worker strike, where he says famously that all labor has dignity. But the line that leads up to that, he says, someday our country will recognize that the sanitation worker is as essential as the physician for our health and well-being. And that really is this moment. We have these jobs and workers who we really do rely on for our well-being, and they're the people who always help take care of children, who've been there for our older loved ones in their moment of need. They are the farm workers. They are the delivery workers. They are anybody in the healthcare system. And right now, we have this moment where we're realizing they're essential. They're heroes. They get applause as they go to work. But the other thing Martin Luther King said was the recognition of dignity without actual provisions to treat people with dignity can feel empty. And he said in that same speech, what good is it to win the right to sit at an integrated lunch counter if you don't have enough money to feed your family? And I think if you're a home health aide who's risking your lives for other people, and you're getting paid 12 to 14 an hour, and half of them couldn't take a single day of paid sick leave for their own family, or you're a meat worker who's been ordered back to what are often dangerous plants, particularly poultry workers, and you're told that there's no real guarantee of your safety, then you have to question that even if you feel dignity and even if other people applaud you for your service, are you actually being treated with economic dignity so that you can raise your family and care for them with dignity? And I think that the question is, will we do something about this right now with essential workers? And then secondly, will we have a rethink about what our social compact is and what that guarantee of economic dignity should be for all workers at all times?
And Gene, that's exactly my question, because as you lay these things out, I think there are very few people who would say, oh no, we shouldn't be thinking about those issues. But right now we have a crisis. Is this the right time to address those things? We don't have the social compact that you describe in your book. Is this a time to do that? And in this crisis, what can we do specifically to address some of those needs? Or do we need to put it off until we come through the pandemic?
Well, no, actually, in some ways, the imperative to address those is actually greater. Like, for example, I would believe that it is just morally problematic that 1 in 10 people who care for other people's children couldn't take a week off for the birth of their own child. But now when we look at paid sick leave, we all have a very tangible self-interest in that. If people do not have universal health care, if they do not have universal paid sick leave, they're going to be more likely to go to work when they have symptoms because they have to. And that's going to lead to more community spread. There's no question that there are people with the COVID who are afraid to go to the hospital, not because they're worried they can't afford it. So in a way, this has almost been a moment where we may be seeing more self-interest in a broader compact, and that, and even you have people like Mitt Romney, Republicans, saying we should have hazard pay. If people are taking risks for us, we the people should compensate them more. So I think the case for that type of broader social compact is greater now. My big question is, will we just forget about that as soon as it's over and go back to allowing farm workers to have 50% of them not to have health care, our home health aides to only be paid $12 or $14 an hour when they are often putting themselves on the line for us?
So we are hearing some dissension even in Washington over some of the aid that's been given. And as I say, I don't think there's anybody that says we shouldn't have, for example, hazard pay for the people who are really putting their lives in danger. At the same time, you hear, particularly Republicans, I'll say that, particularly Republicans saying this is not the time to rechange the entire economy. A fair amount of the country is concerned that if we put too much of a social safety net out there, that in fact there's almost a moral hazard that will not give people incentive. Right now you're hearing discussions about unemployment insurance and whether in fact you're paying people more to be unemployed than employed. What do you say to them?
Well, let me explain what happened. What Democrats were trying to do initially is saying, at a time when you're ordering people not to work, you should give them their unemployment benefits should replace 100% of their paycheck, because you don't want them to have an incentive to work if they're, in a restaurant or nail salon or place that's completely shut down. It turned out that the Trump administration didn't feel they could change things quickly enough to figure out how to do 100% replacement. So they agreed on a $600 bonus. That turns out to give some people more than their paycheck. That's not something you want to do permanently. I don't think we should be worrying about it that much when I think the real unemployment rate right now is not 14.7%, but 20 or 25%. But I think what we can do is say, let's have an unemployment check that makes people whole when you have this kind of 20% unemployment, and perhaps then it provides 90%, then 80% of your paycheck as time goes on, but you link it to the labor market. And so there's an incentive to work. But I tell you, I think most people in this kind of labor market are pretty anxious to get a job. And I think what's keeping people from coming back to work are fears about safety, not that they're, thinking I might have $50 extra a week if I stayed at home. I think they know people want to work, they want to contribute, they want to do their part, they feel a dignity in work. So I think we can design that unemployment insurance so it's not tied to an arbitrary date, doesn't give the wrong incentives, but is there as long as we have this depression-like unemployment rates, at least until that ends, until we get well under 10% unemployment.
And finally, and this is a broader question, but just briefly if you can, what's gone wrong with our politics? Because in your book itself, you recount an instance of a congressman calling you up in the middle of the Affordable Care Act debate, who would be on the side of it saying, look, we should be paying attention to the economy, reflecting what their constituents say. A lot of the country is worried that we should be paying attention to the economy, not to social welfare. What's gone wrong with the politics?
Well, I think my point is that, what's the economy? The economy is all of us. And so, what's our goal? Our goal isn't just a particular metric. Our goal is, can we provide people a dignified living? So I don't feel, I really don't feel that the kind of thing I'm talking about is really, some kind of, radical or just left agenda. I think this, I quote Teddy Roosevelt, the Republican Teddy Roosevelt, who talks in 1912, 108 years ago, about the idea that he believes in work. He wants people to work, but that work ought to bring with it a degree of economic security for one's family. And I think that is a common goal, and I think that's a common ethic. And so, I don't feel like this is some, lefty type agenda. It really is a dignity agenda. It's about the dignity of work, and I think that appeals to people across the spectrum, that if you're doing your part, if you're doing your share, if you're carrying your part of the load, you should be able to work in dignity. You should be able to retire in dignity. You should be able to raise your family with dignity. I think that's just trying to realize a basic American value.
All right. Okay, Gina, really appreciate it. And congratulations on this major new book. It is called Economic Dignity from Gene Sperling. And a program note, at 6 p.m. this evening, we're going to have Wall Street Week on. We'll have Larry Summers talk about some of the things that exactly Gene Sperling was just talking about, as well as Kathy Wood, and she is from ARK Investments, about some of her investments in tech. That's coming up at 6 p.m. Eastern Time tonight on Bloomberg Television. Meantime, coming up right here, we're going to have the CEO of Booking Holdings. They're right at the center of knowing what's going on in the hotel industry, which is badly hit by this pandemic. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. Welcome back to Bloomberg Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. Booking Holdings came out with its first quarter earnings yesterday, and among other things, we learned that bookings for the quarter were down about 43% for hotels, and they were down about 85% so far in the month of April. We welcome now its CEO. He is Glenn Fogel. So thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Fogel. Give us a sense of what you're seeing right now with respect to booking for hotel rooms.
Well, thank you, David, for having me. And we did our earnings call yesterday, and we were fairly clear about how this is a difficult time for the hotel industry. People are fearful of traveling, and that, of course, has caused significant disruption to the entire travel industry. We talked about our April numbers, and we said when you look at the newly booked reservations for hotels at Booking.com, it's down 85% approximately year over year. And, that is a drastic change.
Are you seeing any indications at all of a bottom? Are you seeing it pick up anywhere? And by the way, does it vary from geography to geography, or the sorts of hotels that are being booked?
Well, we did say last night, we did use the word we are, seeing a steadying of the rate of our business. And there certainly are some areas where you are seeing some very small green shoots. If you go out to Asia, and take China, for example, China was the first place where the virus emerged and was the first place to have serious lockdowns. And they are also the first people out. And they are probably having the fastest recovery in the travel industry, the hotel industry, certainly. And I've had discussions with people there, and they are beginning to see a comeback. And then you look at some of the other areas. Korea, we know, also very early into the difficulties. Also, they are one of the ones faster coming out. Vietnam, interestingly, showing some stuff there. You get to Europe, it's a little tougher, but Germany is beginning to show just the tiniest bit. But I want to caution, and yes, it's great to see these very tiny green shoots. But the fact is, it's so far from a full recovery, and we were very careful last night talking on our earnings call that we believe this full recovery will take years, not quarters.
Are there alternatives to typical hotel rooms you stay in for a night or two that may be holding up? I mean, things where they're basically sharing houses.
Yeah, we that's what we call the alternative accommodations business, and that has shown a little bit more life than the pure hotel. And it's very interesting, too, in terms of the shape of the booking window, we call it, where we have more people who want to either get something immediately tonight or tomorrow night, or far, far in the future, months and months advance, and nothing pretty much in the middle. And it's interesting because what we think is happening a little bit is that people who desperately need something absolutely tonight for something that's specific, we understand that. But the stuff far out is because people are saying, well, maybe things will be okay then. Maybe things will be better. And I'll lock in some really good prices right now. and it's refundable. When you use Booking.com, it's very flexible. You can cancel. So people say, hey, I'll get it. I'll get the good price. And if the virus is still around, if there haven't been any sort of cures, I'm going to then be able to cancel. So that's what we're seeing in our booking curve. And in terms of the accommodations, the differential more in the home versus the hotel, it's going to be interesting. Do people feel better about a home because there's not a lobby with lots of other people, you're not touching an elevator? Or are people saying, well, I want to stay in a hotel because I know it's being industrially cleaned and disinfected, and I don't have to worry about is it safe to go into that place or not? Interesting thing, I don't think there's enough data to show which way it's going to play out.
Glenn, do you have any way of knowing whether what may be affected is how you get to the hotel? That's say, are you tied to aviation? Because aviation obviously is almost dead right now in the United States and a lot of other places. Is it possible that we'll start going to hotels that we can drive to and that we don't have to fly to? Is the problem with the hotel or the way you get there?
That is, that is absolutely what we are seeing. And, it's interesting where we say, we've been telling people how there's more business that's domestic than international, but everybody knows that. And what's more interesting is people are booking stuff that's very close. It's 100 miles or 200 miles. It's, as you say, within driving distance because people feel much more comfortable being in their car. They control that environment. They feel safe about that, and they will do that. Also, a lot, of course, of this early booking, when like tonight or tomorrow night, when somebody's booking, they're not going to be going far. So that also is helping to add that obviously this is local business. And we're definitely recognizing that and seeing that. Now, the flip side will be great. When we start seeing people being willing to book further from where they live, that'll be a nice sign to see that there's improvement happening in the industry.
Glenn, I also wonder whether there's anything the hotels themselves can do to affect people's behavior. That is to say, is there any indication hotels might start to compete on the fact that, you know what, we're safer than any place else because of the following 17 things that we do to make sure we don't have coronavirus?
Well, I don't think it's really competition against each other. It's more of the thing of wanting to get people who are thinking of traveling to feel comfortable and safe to go there. I mean, no airline really ever has advertised that their planes are safer than another person's plane, because that's not really good, because then you start thinking how safe is it or not. But in this situation, I think it is a case where people will be doing certain things that just to make they're doing it not because they're better than their competitor. It's just to make people feel comfortable. So you have airlines, for example, that are handing out masks. So everybody has to wear a mask. That makes everybody feel safer that everybody's wearing a mask. And hotels that are explaining what their cleanliness level is, how they're doing it, how many times a day, what they're doing, how many people are involved in it, and making it so people feel comfortable. Right. If I go to that hotel, it's a safe environment that I can go to, because that's really what this all is. It's people who are correctly feeling very unsafe, as right. I mean, this is a dangerous virus that has tragically hurt so many people and killed so many people, and it's right for people who are fearful. Right. So people who are in the travel business want to make it safe.
Yeah, sadly, so very true. Glenn Fogel, he's the CEO of Booking Holdings. Thanks so much for being with us. And coming up next hour, we're going to get to talk with the Labor Secretary. He is Eugene Scalia, about those jobs numbers. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. GM is our stock of the hour. Shares are up today after it announced it has a new debt offering of $4 billion. That comes on top of $5.4 billion they took down in revolver earlier in the week. They've got a lot of cash sitting around, and Abigail Doolittle is here to explain to us exactly why GM's doing so terribly well.
Well, that is certainly a lot of cash that they have on their balance sheet at this point, Dave. And it's sort of interesting because, of course, as you know, earlier this week, they reported a better than expected first quarter. They even talked about resiliency for the pickup truck and talking about new product strength. So you would wonder, why do they need this cash? So when a pessimist might say that they're planning for some worst case doomsday scenario, an optimist might say that they're just trying to really shore up the balance sheet. And it's probably somewhere in between, because their CFO on Wednesday during the earnings call, as you know, talked about the idea that they want an investment-grade balance sheet. Just yesterday, Fitch downgraded them. Outlook stable, saying that they're going to make it through. But you could make the case that they want this cash on the balance sheet to make sure that, again, they have that investment-grade balance sheet, that high-quality credit rating, and not fall into junk status, David.
Yeah, exactly. At the same time, they have a couple of big challenges. They're opening back up their plants May 18. The state of Michigan said they can do that. They wanted to start making those trucks again because that's really drove first quarter earnings were better than people thought.
They were better than what people thought, and that was on that pickup strength. So it will be interesting to see whether or not they can actually produce the pickup trucks that are desired. Their 2Q guidance or suggestions is that production manufacturing will be down. We'll be at 60 to 70% of capacity, so that's a little bit of a challenge. And overall, the backdrop, very, very difficult. March plunging, overall auto sales down 30%. April, very challenging. So challenges ahead, but it seems as though some are optimistic. We actually just had Deutsche Bank upgrade shares to a buy recently, David, after downgrading to a hold not so long ago.
Okay, thank you so much to Abigail Doolittle for that report on General Motors. Coming up in the second hour of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio, we're going to be talking with Eugene Scalia. He's the Secretary of the Department of Labor about those jobs numbers. This is Bloomberg.